Guys, come take a seat. Get started. Heaps of room in the front row. If anyone would like to take notes or needs to draw pictures, Mark has paper if you didn't bring your own. Awesome. All right. I think a few more people will be turning up, hopefully, as we go. Okay, so pretty much how tonight's going to work is I'll be up here as little as possible, and then Patricia will come up and present to us, and then we'll have a chance to ask questions afterwards. So write your questions down and hold them up, and she'll answer every single one, I think. Definitely, awesome. All right, so welcome, Patricia.
He's just so charming, isn't he?
He is.
He just does it for love, not for my arthritis.
Perfect. Who's in your family? We'll start with that.
Oh, I have one husband and one son.
Yeah, that's good.
That's
good
one.
Start.
Basanta,
Awesome.
we've been married for 47 years, I think. And our son is Kamal. He is a Presbyterian minister. And that's it.
Nice. And how did you come to know Christ?
I was born in a Christian family. My grandparents were converted. My grandfather's name was Rasaya Mutvelu Ratnam. But the wonderful, I love the expression, and the wonderful Welsh missionary decided that was far too pagan, so he changed it to Roberts.
Oh.
So I grew up as Patricia Roberts in Sri Lanka.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. Anyway, I think I actually came to the Lord for myself at about 13. I was in a Methodist missionary school, so with the British missionaries. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, look forward to hearing more of what you have to say, so I'll leave you with it.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me, and it's great to be out here in a nice warm place with nice warm people on a cold night like this. So you've heard just a quickie version, but let me just tell you a little bit more about my background so that you have wonder. Otherwise you're wondering, what has this old subcontinental woman got to tell us about sex? So some of you who have heard me before are like, we've heard that before, right? So I was born in Sri Lanka. I went to medical school in Sri Lanka, so my first degree is in medicine. Did my postgraduate study in Hawaii. That's where I was studying sex and worshiping in a wonderful evangelical Baptist church. And I like to say that I brought my twin passions of God and sex together. Then I went back to Sri Lanka, and for 6 years I was the only sex therapist in the country, busy times with 20 million population. And then 32 years ago, we migrated to Australia. And I have been an academic with the University of Sydney for 25 years. And the last 8 years, I was director of a graduate program in sexual health. I retired at the age of 65. That was in 2011, so I'm 74 now. And you know, for those of you, just a few of you maybe, who are close to retirement, be careful what you pray for when you're retiring. Because I thought I'd like to do like my craft and creative writing, but I happened to pray to God and said, use me. And God tends to hear prayers. So ever since retirement, I've been writing and speaking on sexual health from a biblical, Christ-focused perspective. So that's my background. And today, I will be speaking to you a little bit about, as you can see up there, sex education. Today's world is challenging your children and yourself. And this is an interesting talk, because if you heard me before, which probably you haven't, I haven't been here, but if you have, I find that it's almost like every 2 months or every month almost, I want to change it because things are changing so rapidly in our children's lives. So, very briefly, who are these kids? I'm sure you're aware of this, and if not you, then who, when it comes to talking to them about relationships and sexuality? Your older kids are who we call the Gen Z. This is the ones who are born like after 1995 or so, but before 2010, when it becomes the Gen Alphas. The Gen Zs are the ones who, like right now, are your teenagers and upper teens, and they're wandering around looking like they've got a computer chip implanted in their brains. And that's your Gen Zs. They are the cyber generation. But then you have your Gen Alphas, who are really your babies. They were born either in 2010 or after. 2010 is the year when the iPad was invented and launched, and app was the word of the year. So these ones actually know nothing else. Their toys were iPhones and iPads and not rattles and, Tonka trucks. This is their world. So we need to accept that the littlies especially are growing up in what is called the glass age, the swipe right generation. I had one mother tell me her little toddler toddles over to the television and swipes right, because that's their world. It's like, give it to me and give it to me now. So the question we have to ask is, if not you, then who? And we need to be so aware that as parents, as grandparents, it is a primary role. I tell parents, you are God's ambassadors in your children's lives. You cannot relinquish that. Your presence in their life, your role modeling in their life, not just in sex, but in everything, but particularly in today's culture, in sexuality. You have to be the ones who guides them. Because if not you, it will be their friends, and the friends would have got it from other friends, or worse, they get it from pornography. So this is our children's world, and you need to be aware that you are the ones who need to be the proactive taking over that. So we talk about this is your world, this is your world. Our cultural moment, my dear friends, we need to understand that this cultural moment, not just for our children, but even for us, is very challenging. We are at a cultural moment when we are told that it's all about looking into ourselves, finding out what our desires and our feelings are, and that becomes my authentic self. And I need to discover it. And even Disney films, I knew this before, and now it's slipped my mind. And that Frozen, there's a song that's all about me and finding myself. It's all about that. And from children's movies to everything else, it's about looking to yourself, find your feelings and desires, and fulfilling those desires. In other words, find out your authentic self, your feelings and desires, and then express that in your behavior. And that is the only thing that will bring you happiness and contentment. So, in this culture where we are living by desires and feelings and there is no objective truth, you might have heard the words post-truth, post-modernity, expressive individualism. These are all terms that basically mean I find what I want and I will get it. And don't you dare say that I should not do that, because that makes you evil and bigoted. And your children are growing up in what we call the you do you world. It's a relativism. You can do what you want, and I can do what I want, and don't challenge me, I won't challenge you. This is the world we live, our children grow in. The body then becomes a commodity to be used in any way you want. And it's malleable. That's the basis of the whole transgender trend. The body really has no meaning, because feelings are all that matter. Reality really doesn't matter. And sex, too, is like a toy. When I talk to young people, I say it's like something you get at the reject shop that you can just use and throw it away when you're bored with it. And sex also becomes an identity, because if your desires are what is most important, then whatever your desires are in sex is your identity, which ends up by finding a label, anything of those 74 labels on Facebook and Instagram, and that becomes identity. So I'll tease this out more, but basically we are a follow my heart, follow your heart culture, where I am my desires. And we know all of us, that we see the results of that in our culture. Now, I'm sure you are aware that, the viral petition about all the sex abuse of young women, and this was just a couple of months ago. I just pulled this off the news. And is pornography to blame? When the average age of first porn exposure in Australia is 11 years and dropping, is pornography to blame? Is porn wiring the brain, leading this commodification of the body? And is it any surprise that our children are anxious and depressed and even suicidal and self-harming? And then we talk about, should we then be teaching consent? And the headline, one of that other headline says sexual consent. Let's talk about sexual fluency. Sexual fluency is a term to say that we need to be teaching our children to express their sexual pleasures to each other and know what gives them pleasure and what their orgasms are like. So, of course, we've got these teenagers who are going to be sitting there discussing their needs and their wants. If you know anything about a teenage brain, you know that that ain't going to happen. But so that's the point. We need to talk about pleasure. We need to be teaching our children about recognizing the sexual pleasure of their body. And in that other cut I got from, it's a US study, the Gallup poll from US, where about 6% of the Gen Z type age group would say that they are transgender or some bisexual or bigender. 6%. This is what we are seeing. And consent then may be not enough. We need to recover the meaning, the true meaning of sex. So what is this true meaning? Where do we even begin to look for a true meaning? And how do we teach it to our children? So I want to I can go on forever, but I want to just talk about 3 things that we need to be teaching our children and ourselves. And this is extremely important. Firstly, that the body has an innate value and dignity. Because in a post-truth world, the body becomes just a vessel for pleasure. And we need to be teaching our children that your bodies matter. We are more than bodies, but we are bodies. And leading from that we have an identity that is beyond ourselves, that is beyond culture, that is uniquely, specially given to us. And finally, we have to be very clear on the unique role of sexual intimacy in a relationship. Now, before I get into that, I want to spend a few minutes talking to you why it is so important and why kids are so vulnerable. Why are young people, we all are, but why are young people so vulnerable to this post-truth, post-modernity, expressive individualism, relativism culture? Why? It is because they're lovely little brains. When I talk to teenagers, I say, look, you've got one brain. For goodness sake, take care of it. Because the brains of young people are in what we call developmental dissonance and neuroplasticity. So let me take a few moments for those of you who are not biologists to just quickly go through that. What do I mean by neuroplasticity? It kind of explains itself. Nerve, plastic. The brain is made of nerve cells, neurons, and wiring, which we call axons and dendrites. But never mind all that, but wiring. Now, this wiring is changing and growing very rapidly from childhood to the mid-20s, very rapidly. So it's like a wiring upgrade all the time happening. Now it's biological, but we know that what goes into the brain will affect the wiring. This is extremely important. The brain works on a use it or lose it principle. What goes into the brain will wire the brain. What you don't use will just be pruned. It will just fade out. So we actually call it pruning. That is just lost. So it's extremely important that we be aware what our kids are feeding their brain. It's so important. We talked of pornography, and I'll come back to pornography later on. The whole social media. Do you know? Your parents, they got 2,000 plus Instagram and Facebook. Who uses Facebook at their age? Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and whatever, friends. But how many parents, 1, 2 parents, you are those. There are all those friends out there, but be the parent God has made you. So that's the neuroplasticity, and I'll come back to it in a moment. The other really important thing is this neuroplastic development doesn't all happen at the same time. The brain develops in a back to front, inside out. The first part that erupts like a volcano is what we call the limbic lobe, the emotional lobe. So think a little bit, for those of you who have kids who have gone through or going through puberty, have you ever thought, you looked at your teenage son or daughter and thought, what have you done to my little possum? Or you go into the bedroom and think, where did this alien come from? Because that's what they are. They're like aliens because that emotional brain is erupting, and that driven by sex hormones with many other chemical changes, but mainly driven by the pubertal hormones. It's about independence and identity. You've gone through the point when your teenager is like, oh, mom, when you try to give them a hug, or the time when you grab the little one's hand across the road, and there comes a time when they're like, don't hold my hand. This is independence, a search for an independent identity. It's part of growing up. But the important question here is that the child who was happy with the family is now looking for a new tribe. And in those days, when the dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was a child, we turned from mom and dad to the friends down the lane. And, mom and dad knew the friends down the lane we were doing things with. They knew the tribe. Today, it's really hard to keep track of the tribe because the tribe is out there in cyberspace. And in the next slide, we'll look at that. And you may not even know. You probably don't. And they may not even know who this tribe who is influencing them are. So independence, identity, and other things like risk-taking. There are a number of kids who have accidents and P-plates, and every time a red P-plate whizzes by, think developing brain, volcanic brain, because risk-taking, especially when there's peer approval. When the peer, the friends are there, the tribe, because you want to prove your dominance, the alpha, per male especially, to the tribe. Because you want to prove yourself to your tribe. Now, together with that comes the quick reward. You want it now, now, now. This is the developing brain. That's all part of this emotional upheaval that is happening. Ever looked at your child and said, you've got to study really hard because, in 10 years' time, when you apply for a job, you'll be really happy, like, duh, tell me what's going to happen in the next 10 seconds. If I say this to like year 9, 10s, they laugh because who cares what happens in the future? It's now the quick rewards. So you add all this up and you get this soup that is like upheaval, emotional. And that's part of growing up. But the important thing is that the control brain up here, the frontal parietal bit, the one that is involved in decision making and deep thinking before you decide to do something. This doesn't actually mature till the mid-20s. And you add a bit of alcohol, and you add the tribe, and it's suppressed even further, especially alcohol. So you see all these things we talked about, all these kids having sex and abuse. Often what is it? Groups, parties with alcohol. So you got alcohol, depressing the control system. You add the peer group and wanting to prove yourself with the peer group. Toxic combination. Toxic combination. So which is again a red flag to you? Do you know about the parties and what's happening in them? Now, very briefly, I don't have a lot of time to be talking about cyber safety, but I just want to tell you this. And you looking at all those and going, what is it? I want to just give you a few tips. If you give your children an iPhone as whatever phone, you need to have what we call an open phone policy. This is where you as a parent says, if you got it on your phone and you don't want to tell me about it, you shouldn't have it on the phone. So you as parents have a right, you're probably paying the telephone bill anyway, you have a right to know what it is and what it's there for. Don't be afraid to take a one down and say, I don't understand that. Then let's go explore, let's go look online and see what this app is, what it does. Is it suitable for you, for your age? Explore with them. We call that being a social media mentor. So that takes you from this horrible mom and dad who say, don't, who say, oh, so you want to get into TikTok. Let's go have a look and see what it is and what age it's appropriate for and how you can use it. Let's see how we set some limits. Why is it so important? It's because almost every app and everything, including gaming and entertainment apps, will lead into chat rooms and chat forums. That leads to what we call the dark web, the underbelly of social media. That's where kids get sucked into pornography, and they're in chat rooms where they go in and they put some question, and a girl who goes and says, I don't like my breasts, gets sucked into a transgender forum where they say, if you don't like your breasts, you must be a boy. Or a guy who says, I don't like getting erections, then you must be a girl. Let's teach you what to say. Let's teach you how to say things to your teachers, how you can say, how you ask for new pronouns. They're trained in those chat forums. And of course, pornography, exposure. So easy. As I said, the average age, 11 and dropping. And of course, catfishing, which every teenager knows, is somebody who pretends to be a young girl or a boy, but is actually maybe a 50-year-old man sitting in a village in Sri Lanka. But the reality is, you need to be aware. And you need to talk to your children and explain the dangers. You can put every external filter, but the heart filter is the most important. And you as parents, aunties, uncles, every child in the church is actually your child. So keep an eye out for anything that you might be seeing happening. And alert each other, alert the parents. It's so important. So that's the developing brain. Know what they're feeding it and set the boundaries as parents. So let's get into what we talked about, the innate value and dignity of the body. Now, I am a doctor and what we call a sexologist, which is basically somebody who studies about sex, reads about sex, researches about sex, writes about sex, does sex therapy. My son says that's why he's an only child. So the reality is that I also did anatomy. And often when I'm talking to young people, I say, yes, the body has an innate value and dignity, and as Christians, we can speak about the Bible. But look, as a doctor and anatomist, I find the development of the body amazing. Now, those two little tubes are how the heart starts off. Now, if you're a biologist, you will know that. That's how the heart starts. And it ends up in this highly beautiful, complex 4 chambers. I mean, that alone says the body is special. In the uterus, the body development is unique. It's so wonderful. And there's no part of the body that is as exciting as the genitals. Now, I'm an anatomist, a doctor, and a sexologist. Of course, I love the genitals. And, I'm particularly excited about the penis. Because, every other part of the body, now think about this for a moment. Every other part of the body is kind of doing the same old, same old, same old. Your heart's beating, your lungs going in and out, your liver's just sort of chugging off those chemicals, your stomach's just sort of crunching up your dinner, big deal. But the genitals, it knows exactly what to do and when to do it. Isn't that amazing how God has wired it? So, that's how unique your body. And the vagina, it can hang on to the littlest and then open out to let the baby's head through. I just find that so amazing. I'm sorry, I get excited about genitals. But that's just science. And this is why in our books, all the books, we tend to sort of talk research, talk science, talk how, because kids today want, even Christian kids want more than thus says the word of God. And yes, that's where we land. But I think we need to give them more. We need to give them that flesh of real research and development. Then, of course, we go into God's word, and young people need to learn here how unique the body is. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? What does it mean when Jesus came down to earth? You don't even have to say incarnate. Came down to earth as a squealing little baby who was mewing and puking and, doing all the things that babies do. A human baby. And grew up and then died as a human. You know all this. But teach your children from the time they are very young. And in a world of misogynistic attitudes, teach your children, talk to them how Jesus treated women. Because, he was in a culture which was misogynistic and patriarchal. But he treated women as special. Read them stories like the woman at the well and how, other people would have shunned her, but Jesus took time out with her. Talk to her, talk to them, teach them how Jesus valued women, valued bodies. And then in 1 Corinthians 6, teach them, and this crosses with identity, but, the body belongs to Jesus. Your body is the home of the Holy Spirit. Honor God with your body. When I'm talking to teenagers, and especially like year 11, 12s, I tell them, if you honor, and that's where we land when it comes to the whole consent thing. We can talk about consent. May I touch your breasts, please? Now, may I please do this? May I? And then you've got to wait till yes, come on, they're teenagers with emotional brains on roller coasters. But if they have an underpinning understanding that they honor their bodies and respect their bodies and honor and respect the bodies of other people, it will affect everything they do. And consent will be part of it, but it will not be the main thing. The main thing is honor and respect. And that comes directly from caring and honoring your body as special and that of others as unique, valued dignity. I tell young people, I said, if you value, gentlemen, if you value the girl, you will never send her a dick pic. And they sit there going, did she actually say that? She did. She might as well accept it because you won't do it. Apart from the fact that whoever can recognize you from your penis anyway. Hi, this is me. Like, hello. I tell people I've worked in 3 continents, and as sexologists, I've seen many of them. And frankly, they're pretty generic, except for the color. So how would you recognize them? Why would you even think you need to do that? But this is our culture. We're just that emotional, I feel like doing it, I will do it. And Where's your respect? Where's your honor when you ask a girl for a picture of a nude? When a girl asks a boy for a nude, which they do, where is your honor? And if a culture where they can do that, the next step of sexually intimate behavior and abuse is only a step from there, because you've already devalued and commodified the body. So we need to teach that underlying honor of the body, and we need to start that really early. And we need to teach our children that a world-based identity isn't working. It's just not working, because identity based on the body. You've got to get that profile out. So you've got to look at the latest influencer or the YouTuber and Kim Kardashian's bum or whatever it is. And that's what you need to have the best pout or the best six-pack or shredded abs or whatever, and put it out there and say, this is me. Hello, everybody. Download my TikTok videos. Some of those Instagram and TikTok videos, I just sometimes go on just to see what's out there before I do a teen talk. And it's like, really? But I guess that's exciting if you're a teen brain. But anyway, you put that out there and you want to see how many likes or how many downloads you get, and that becomes your identity, that profile you've got. Or the body angst of puberty, when you get it out there and you're in a chat forum searching for some validation. And often you get the validation in all the wrong places, from some pornography group or some transgender forum who validate you in that wrong space that you are in that imaginary feelings. Remember, living by feelings and desires. Get validated rather than questioned and challenged. This is the identity they build. Or, as I said, in a world of gender fluidity, where children are being told there is no biological sex. Well, I think it was a youth worker who told me this, that a year 6 girl came and said that her teacher said, you don't have to be what's between your legs. You can choose whoever you want to be. I mean, in a time when, you don't know whether Mr. Johnson is going to come back as Miss Johnson next semester. You really don't know, because what is that doing to our children? What is it teaching them about where you place your identity labels? And if you're living by desires and feelings, then you must live out those feelings. So if I feel desire, puberty, desires bubbling up in the brain, I feel desire, then I must live it. I must live it. And so, sexual intimacy, having sex, becomes a source of fulfillment and happiness and satisfaction. I have had even 30 and 40-year-olds coming to me and saying, I really didn't know you could be happy without having sex. Celibacy becomes almost like a dirty word. Whoever can be celibate, because you've got to live your desires. And I tell young people, I've been a doctor for 50 years, a sexologist for 45. I've seen people die of lack of medicine and healthcare and water and food. Not one empirically reported case of death by lack of sex. People die by having sex and catching something, but nobody ever died by not having sex. There are wonderful celibate young men and women and older men and women. And so, I would point them to people like Vaughan Roberts, Rosario Butterfield, Wesley Hill, Sam Albury. There are so many, some of them I've named are ministers, who openly say, I'm same-sex attracted, but I'm a Christian and I stay celibate. And I'm content. So we need to talk to our children about this, that sex is not needed for happiness and contentment. And we need to unashamedly point them to an identity that is given and not earned. And now you know this, so there's nothing new in any of these I mean, any Anglican evangelical church has taught you all this. You are created by God, and I take time when I'm talking to teenagers to take them to Genesis and talk about God said, let us make man in our image. The hour of the Trinity indicates a relationship. And I tell them that you're created for a relationship. That means you're created for intimacy. Don't ever confuse intimacy with intercourse. You can love. You can love boys and you can love girls. Loving and caring is called friendship. Don't mistake that for sex. And just because you care for boys and care for girls does not make you a bisexual. I talk in schools, and year 9, year 8, if you've got kids in year 8 and 9, watch it. Because that seems to be a cusp year where they are being bombarded with all this. You've got to have a label. You've got to have a label. So you've got to choose. You're bisexual, or you're bigender, or you're polygender, or you're agender, or you're omnigender, or you're demigender. You've got to choose a label. And one parent said her daughter came year 9, and said that everyone in class is choosing gender labels, but she doesn't like sex, so she's decided that she's going to be asexual. Asexual means, I'm just not interested in sex. And the mother said, I hope she stays that way. So the reality is that they're being told that they must find a label. And I tell them, God said, let us make man in our. Enjoy the intimacy of friendship. So role model it. Show it in your lives. Show it in your lives that you can have girls as friends and boys as friends, men as friends, aunties, uncles. And it doesn't have to be sexual, because that's not what the world is telling your children. They can't even get it. I had to repeat it about 3 times during question time in the one school I was in last week, because they kept saying, but then you're saying that we are all bisexual. No, I'm saying that you can have friends. But if you love people, that makes you bisexual. They don't even have a category for it anymore. And it's up to us to teach them that early and keep teaching them that. I talk about Psalm 139, and I say, King David said, you knit me in my mother's womb. Knit. You think mommy and daddy were knitting? They were having the best sex ever. And I tell them, go home today and ask mom and dad about that orgasm they had when you were knit in the womb. And mom didn't even know till about 67 weeks later when she started puking all over. But God knew. You see, you were chosen by God at that moment when you were knit in your mother's womb, when dad's sperm went, whoopee, here's the ovum. And you, God said, my child. That's all the identity. Talk to your children. Now they can call God Father. I talk in school, so I say, some of you may not have a good relationship with your father, but you have the only father who matters. Talk to them about these things. And finally, talk to them about the unique role of sexual intimacy. Now, again, as I said, even the little ones, we need to start by talking about science. And so I talk to them about desire is a chemical driven by testosterone that starts bubbling at puberty. I'm just putting when I'm talking to younger ones, I say, okay, science hat. So I'm going to talk to you about science, and I take it off and say, okay, my God hat now. So take them to the science, but that teaches you, the testosterone in the brain is the appetite. I think I like sex. I think I'm just looking for sex. And I say, some of you will have a higher desire. So you're like, sex, yes, where can I get it? And others are like, if I trip over it, I might notice it, but otherwise, who cares? And that's quite normal at any age, and it waxes and wanes. But it's a wanting. Compare that with the culture, where every desire and feeling is a need and a right. And we need to teach our children that discernment about wanting something and it being a need and a right and an immediate self-gratification. We need to be teaching them not to sort of concentrate on immediate rewards. These are things you train from the time kids are really little. Now, quickly moving on, we talk about romantic love. You remember the first time you saw your husband, wife, fiancé, whatever, and that moment of heart palpitating, pupil dilating, sweating in winter feeling. And I talked to them, it's just a chemical called dopamine, and basically it makes you dopey, and falling in love is the dopiest thing you ever do in your life. Because basically serotonin levels go down, it's the same thing as obsessive compulsive behavior. The same changes take place if you were to take a cocaine hit. You know, love is like that. It's it's under the influence. And you can imagine you're under that influence, and then you're asked to sort of stop and think. And you're getting sexually aroused by just looking at the girl or boy, remember? And the teen brain is about 5 times as reactive and responsive to sex and violence as our adult brains. So when a young person is in this dopey phase, just saying, just don't do it is not enough. Just give it up. You've got to be helping them to understand that this is a strong emotion, that desire is a strong feeling, but teaching them that feelings and emotions are just that, feelings and emotions. And control, self-control is a learned attribute. You don't live by every emotion. So that's something we need to be teaching our children, because sexual intimacy or sexual activity of any sort is a binding act. You bind at brain level, different chemicals, oxytocin, vasopressin, same chemicals that bind a mother and a baby when the baby suckles at the breast. When you have sexual activity, it binds you at brain level and at some deep soul level. So I tell young people it's like forming a super glue bond. You form a super glue bond and you break up. It's like you leave a bit of yourself and you take a bit of that person with you. And they need to understand this, that there is a uniqueness about sexual intimacy, that any form of intimacy, you know, even the Apostle Paul said, greet each other with a holy kiss. Not under COVID, but otherwise, you know, there's a tiny little speak of oxytocin that bonds us together as a family of Christ. You have sexual intimacy, the oxytocin goes through the roof, and it binds you together. It's not something to be trivialized. There is nothing casual about sex. Sex is never casual. And I tell them it's not just intercourse. It's whether you're fingering or you're having oral sex or you're stroking intimately. Even deep kissing is a binding act. So we need to explain that. And then, I won't take a long time, but we need to understand for ourselves that God is not a cosmic killjoy, but the Bible actually sings to the beauty of sex. I mean, when God created Adam and Eve, what was the first thing he told them? He said, get out there and procreate and fill the earth. I mean, you know, multiply, not mathematics, but just have lots of babies. And he could have made it really boring, but he didn't. He said, you're going to have a lot of fun keeping this command. And he created the body and the genitals full of nerve endings so that you have a lot of fun having babies. So right from Genesis, Adam, Eve, you know, Adam wakes up and he sees Eve, the first blind date, and he's like, oh, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, the most beautiful girl I've seen. He'd never seen another one. But at that moment, he recognizes desire is born. They're in love, and they're naked and no shame. You know, I talk to young people, and you can do this. Nakedness is total vulnerability. And I tell them, you guys are young and tight and taut. You just wait till you're 74 and everything's migrating to Melbourne. Then you will be really, really happy that you can be naked with your partner and go, look at that wrinkle. I remember when it was up there. And so, you know, you can be naked and vulnerable. And at this point, when I'm doing a youth talk and my husband's sitting there, all eyes turn towards him. So, you know, and you can be totally naked and vulnerable And you know that you're with someone whom you totally trust. That is, you are not ashamed. And I tell them, look, the only place where you can be with someone you totally trust is when that person has made promises to you before God and his people, and that is called marriage. One man, one woman, marriage. Then the whole Bible sings to it. You know, you can take them, the older ones, through Ezekiel and Hosea and talk to them about Genesis, but Jesus, when asked about divorce in Matthew 19, points back to Genesis. And then, of course, Song of Songs, I always use this particular one where it says, love is as strong as death, its jealousy unyielding as a grave. It burns like a blazing fire. I talk about fire. Fire is good in the heart. It warms us on a winter night. You light the fire out in the tinder dry bush by having premarital sex or lusting after something or watching pornography. It's a bushfire. And it will destroy. So protect. Teach them to protect their bodies. Protect that act of intimacy. Talk about intimacy of friendship and sexual intimacy as something you protect. Talk to them about marriage. Demonstrate to them that husband-wife sexual intimacy. You know, kissing at the kitchen sink, highly recommended. Let them see you doing those cuddles and kissing. It's good. I mean, they go, ew, get a room, but they'll remember it for the future, that mom and dad were intimate, and that is good, very good, God said. So, then, now let's pull this together. And of course, when you're talking about marriage, never forget to go to Revelation, Jesus and the bride, Ephesians 5, that marriage, a little model of Christ's love for the church. And there's a whole big thing you can do there. All the books cover that. So let's take time out now and pull this all together and give you a few practical pointers to talking to kids. Never too early, never too late. Never too early. When your kids start talking and they are interested in body parts, you're teaching them everything else. For goodness sake, teach them the right names for the body. Your boy has a penis and a scrotum. Does not have a dick, willy, or a Kevin. I had a patient who said Kevin isn't behaving. And I thought maybe he's gay. Turns out that he'd given it a name, and it was Kevin, and Kevin wasn't rising when he wanted him to. So please don't give cutesy names. I mean, your daughter has a vagina and a vulva. Don't worry about the clitoris. Some adults haven't found it. So just talk about vulva and vagina. The right terms. Now, this hasn't, today's cultural milieu, at least two things very important. One is, somebody shows your child pornography or some pictures, they have the words to come and tell you that someone showed you, you know, someone with a penis showed us a picture of a penis or something. And young ones, they don't have that filter that says this is a bad thing to say. If you told them that this is a part of the body, but it is also a part of the body that we keep covered because it is a special part. It is, I tell parents, you talk to young ones, you tell them, this is a part of the body that God made for a special job. And that is baby making. That makes it so special to God that we keep it for that special person only. So that's why we cover it up. It is not a toy to be played with. It is a good thing that we protect. And so that leads into safety and body care. And, you know, they can come and, so if you have the right words, they can come and tell you if somebody shows them something, and they can also tell you if somebody does something inappropriate. So that gives it that early words and language, and in addition, if you start talking to them about it in a simple way, they feel safe to later on to keep the conversation going. The earlier you start, so never too early. And be honest and unafraid. So it's okay. Teach your values. Talk about the biblical values. It is okay. And remember, sex education is caught and taught. You can teach it, but they also watch you. And this is where I say the whole church is involved. You know, little girls will watch how older girls are acting, how older girls are dressing, how older girls are talking. And the same thing with boys. They're looking around for role models. So be aware as a church that the young ones are watching you and learning from you. And of course, keep drip feeding. Please, not that one birds and bees conversation. Keep the drip feeding through life. Be proactive and reactive. What do I mean by that? Proactive is kind of obvious. You start the conversation. You can do it anyway. I mean, like some parents talk when they are in the car, you know, the long drive to school. Great time, captive audience. And, you know, they say sometimes they're taking other children. You listen to the conversations that they are having. And that becomes a teachable moment that you can later talk to your child about. What was that about? What were you guys talking about? And encourage them to talk to you. So always be present in their life. And sometimes you have to be reactive. If your child might come and ask you something, and that's reactive. But if you haven't started the conversation and you're waiting to be asked, it may be that they start off with a lot of misinformation. And then you are the one who will have to then start correcting misinformation. You know, just a little story here, it just came to my mind. You know, like especially if you know your grandparents, and someone, he actually told me this story, where little Johnny was being looked after by Nana and Poppy. So Poppy was in the shed, and little Johnny comes in and says, "Poppy, what is couple sex?" So Poppy thinks, oh, well, you know, he had been for Dr. Pat's talk, so he thought, you know, it's my turn to do the talk. So he talked, and he drew penis, vagina, and told Johnny everything. And then at the end of it, he asked little Johnny, "Why did you ask, darling?" He said, "Nah, Nana said lunch will be ready in couple sex." So what I tell people is, if your child comes and asks you something, firstly ask, where did you hear that? What do you know? And then explain. The where did you hear that is important. Because they come and ask, what's oral sex? Where did you hear it becomes important, because it might have been somebody introducing them to pornography. Worst case scenario, it could be some kind of intrusive behavior. So always, where did you hear it? What do you know? And then explain. Really important. So I talked about teachable moments. Always look for moments. They're everywhere, you know, newspaper articles. Don't wait till you're asked. You just introduce the discussion as you go along. Always look for gospel opportunities. You know, reading the Bible with your children is highly recommended, and it's full of sexual stories, especially the Old Testament and the New Testament. So how can the Samaritan woman, how did she have 5 husbands? So, conversation starter. Of course, parents, we all have various myths to this discussion. So, personal discomfort. I mean, I tell people that my mother's urn, ashes are probably leaping around in her urn, because, I mean, you know, she never mentioned sex to me. So, I wonder how I ended up a sexologist. But anyway, it's okay to be uncomfortable. But, you know, get over it. Talk to each other as husband and wife. Discuss where you were. Where did you get your information from? And if you don't know, it's okay. Get good information from books. We recommend ours, but there's lots out there that are good information sources. And websites, I highly recommend the Australian site, esafety.gov.au. That's the eSafety Commissioner's website. Highly recommended. They talk, and the other one, Protect Young Eyes. They're both good sites which rate apps and, you know, even movies, and it's just really good that you can find a lot of information. Often parents believe the myths that if you talk about it, your kid's going to run out and experiment wrong. Completely wrong. All the secular research says that if they hear it from a trusted adult, especially a parent, young people put off risk-taking and put off having sexual intimacy because they've heard about it. And I often wonder whether my son heard so much about it that he's actually still celibate and single at 46. So he was editing my books when he was 13. So no wonder, the poor child. So anyway, you know, it's a lie. It's a myth. Childhood innocence. My child is innocent. The time when we said that is far gone. Child-on-child sexual abuse is rising in primary school. Children are being exposed to porn in primary school. Children are learning about gender fluidity in primary school. You've got to start talking if your kids are in primary school. And that fear that, you know, other parents are going to think that I'm a bad parent. Just because, and again, a little story, I did a talk like this, later met a young mother in church, and she said, you told me to tell all the body parts, so I taught my little boy. Then I got a call from his preschool teacher and said that little, whatever his name was, subcontinental name, went to the playground and told the other boys, I have a penis. So this, and the teacher told the mother, you know, this is what he said. And the mother very wisely said, well, don't the other boys have one too? And then, of course, he talked to the son and said, you know, there's appropriate times when you talk about these special parts of your body. But it is okay. It is okay. You better err that way than the other. Now, for a few minutes, I want to talk to you about the two elephants in the room. And these are two talks that actually are full talks that I'm going to give you in 3 minutes each, okay? The gender that your kids are being exposed to, the gender fluidity, and of course, pornography. Now, gender, now hold on to your chairs because again, I'm going the 1.5 hour talk in 3 minutes. Right. Gender is incredibly complex and full of myths and misconceptions and frank lies. So, 4 aspects of gender and sexuality: biological sex, how we behave. Biological sex is our biology, determined at conception when the sperm and ovum meet. XY would be a male, XX a female, and if a Y chromosome, a testes develops, without a Y, the ovary. At that point, we are talking 1 month in the womb, biological sex is determined. It is determined at conception, at that point when those gonads are developed. This is not what children are being taught. Then we can observe it, observe development through the uterine development. I mean, those of us who have babies, not in our time, but your time, you had the ultrasounds and you knew what was happening inside. And it is only confirmed at birth. Today, we are being told that you have to talk of sex that is assigned. That is wrong. Sex is not assigned at birth. Assigned would mean, and I've delivered babies, the doctor picks up the baby and goes, nurse, how many boys have we had today? Oh, 4. Meh, let's assign this one a girl then. That's not the way it happens. Biological sex is determined at conception. Now, in about 1 in 5,000 or less, but about 1 in 5,000, this clear male-female development in the womb is disordered. And you have what we call disorders of sex development. Unfortunately, the common word is intersex. That is a dangerously confusing word because the word inter, it gives the impression that there's male, female, and a third sex. Wrong. There's male, female, and disorders of sex development. Now, the lobbies will say that because there are intersex, it means that biological sex is a spectrum. Wrong. Male, female, and disorders like anything else, biological disorder. Now, gender expression or behavior is how we act out, how we show our maleness or our femaleness, our masculinity or femininity. I just want to leave you with one really important point, and that is a child who behaves in a gender non-conforming behavior. In other words, doesn't fit a clear stereotype. A girl who doesn't always want to play with Barbie dolls but would rather be with daddy tinkering on the car, or a boy who would rather go for dance classes and be cooking with mom than be playing soccer and playing Tonka trucks, does not indicate that this child is the other sex. I just really, why are we even thinking this way? Because, I mean, you know, a little girl who likes boy things, those days, you know, we said, she's such a little tomboy. Or he's like, you know, wants to do girl things, a bit of a sissy, isn't he? Oh, come on, let's go out and kick a ball together. That was normal. Today, those children are actually being told, you are the other sex. And this is really important because this is children who are being fast-tracked. And in some states, if a child says, and this could happen here too, if a child says, I am the other sex, the parent has to affirm that. Because if you don't, and in Canada it's already happened, if you don't, then you could be taken to courts for child abuse. You have to affirm what the child says. Let the children decide what they want to be. They can't decide what they're having for dinner, but they can decide and change their gender. It's like, this is this crazy world. And even a child who says, I am the other sex, a little girl who says, I am a boy, or a little boy who says, I am a girl, 90% at least will accept their biological sex at puberty. But if you start the affirmation of allowing them to change and use drugs called puberty blockers, then almost 100% will go on to change sex. And that is what we are being encouraged to do. And there could come a time when we won't have the freedom of expression, and we can't stand here talking about this in public. Where speaking the word of God, created male and female, itself can be bigoted and evil. So, that's expression. Sexual orientation, same-sex attraction being the commonest, and here we need to teach our children. Remember, we are in a culture where we live by our desires. So if I desire someone the same sex, or if I desire male and female, then I must live it out. We need to be teaching our children that even if you have the feeling, and science tells us that for some people, that feeling is innate. Behavior is always a choice. Behavior is always a choice. And we should be very clear and talk to our kids about this. In some schools, when I talked about this, a few of the girls, a few of the young people walked out because they said, we love what Dr. Pat is saying, but we don't agree that we have a choice. If I feel it, I must live it out. Behavior and identity is always a choice. That's why we have celibate people, like I told you before. And then gender identity, that feeling of who I am. Feeling. The body is malleable. I live by my feelings. Therefore, if I'm a girl and I feel like a boy, I have to change to be a boy. Okay. After I've given you all that. Porn on the brain. Now, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Pornography basically uses those dopamine, testosterone circuits. It hijacks it. It floods it with super stimulation of deviant, intense sex. And if you masturbate to it, it gives that opioid high in addition. So it sensitizes the brain. It sets up pathways that lead only to porn. It says, porn is where I get my satisfaction. And I want more and more and more. And after a while, those dopamine circuits get numbed. They get numb. And you want more, and you want more intense and deviant and violent porn to get the same amount of excitement and arousal. Then the frontal lobes, those control lobes, they actually shrink. We can see them shrinking. So you lose control and you're in addiction territory. And every stress will lead to wanting porn. But let me say this very clearly. We worship a God who renews our mind. And neuroplasticity that causes it, and this is neuroplasticity, what you feed your brain, can be rewired. Because what you feed your brain will wire your brain. Use it or lose it. So you don't use the porn and you feed good things, your brain will pick it up. So, you're looking a bit stunned, so we should finish up. So, let me pull here to the fact that you can be the absolutely best parent. You can start the conversation, you can do the drip feeding, you can bring them to church, you can read the Bible, you can talk about sex, you can buy all the books you can and learn everything about it. But this is a broken world, and sometimes kids can go wrong. So, we worship a God who forgives, and we can forgive. But the important thing is you need to be there for them, so that even when something happens, they can come to you. That you will be the person they come to. You will be the person they come to and even say, I'm same-sex attracted, or I think I'm transgender. But you will be the one they come to. So be that person always. And just to be helpful to you, we do have some books. They're all available in Kurong, and I understand Kurong's having a sale. So run out and get some. So the first book we wrote was Teen Sex by the Book. That's for your 15 plus that you give them. It's a research-based book. The first one came out in 2012, and we're already in 3rd edition. And I've told them don't do another print till we have reviewed the gender chapter called Male, Female, and everything in between. Then we wrote Growing Up by the Book. That's for 10 to 14s. And that is now extremely important because of puberty angst and the normality. I mean, you know, when I started talking to kids in like 2012, 2013, I would say puberty and they'll all be like, giggle, giggle, ew. Now you say puberty and they go, ew, that's awful. For some reason, puberty has become something bad. You know, like, so you can put a pause button, press the pause button, puberty blockers. And there are some people, doctors, lobbies, who say doctors should be able to prescribe puberty blocking because why would anyone go through puberty if they don't want to? You know, children should have a right to decide when they want to go through puberty or if they want to go through puberty. It destroys your whole body balance if you do that. But anyway, that's another whole thing I get passionate about. But the reality is that, you know, we need to talk to them about the body. And then we wrote for primary schoolers for you to read. And that's called Birds and Bees by the Book. 6 books, 3 starter books, Me and My Body, Me and My Family. Because your kid in primary school could come and say, how come Tom has 2 mums or 2 dads? You need to be able to talk about that. Me and My Body, Me and My Brain, about self-control and, you know, all that. And then 3 extension books, Understanding Sexuality, Understanding Pornography, and Understanding Gender. So please have a look at Kurong those. And if you want to, and Talking Sex by the Book is the one we just launched last September, and that's a how-to book that talks about general parenting principles and then says under 5 to 10, 10 to 14, over 15, and brain, body, brain, and sexual behavior. So it also has hot questions that kids ask. If you want to put a little zing into your marriage, you might want to buy The Best Sex for Life. That's for couples. And just because I have so much spare time, I like to do creative writing. So that's my 2 books that are also available in Kurong. Empire's Children, set in the tea plantations when I was the time of the British Raj. And Snowy Summer, written for my husband who loves climbing Mount Kosciuszko. So set in Jindabyne. And he always wants me to say that that's a picture that he took from Mount Karatas. So, okay, for those of you who do bushwalking. Okay, so that's all, and that's my email. If any of you want to send me an email, that's my second name, Kamalini, and my birth year, and my website and my Twitter handle. Okay, we have 15, 16 minutes. Sorry, it was a long talk, but I did have a lot to say to you. So, anything you want to know.
We're talking about the open phone policy, which is something we set up in our family. And now the kids are a bit older and they're saying, but you're invading my privacy if you read my stuff. What do you say to that? Like, yes, but we told you it was an open phone policy. What are we doing?
Yeah, that is something that has to be negotiated. The question being, where does privacy? Because what I tell parents to say is, what is happening in your conversations that you can't share with us? Tell me what kind of things happening. Let's be open about the conversation. Because one parent that you said that at this school I was in at last week, she said just that. She said, no, I must just have a look. I won't look every day, but say once in 2 weeks, we sit together. I'm not going to take it from you and look at it, but let's sit together and go through. And she said there were some of 13-year-old girl, and there were some friends who had sent TikTok messages, video thingies that have actually been removed by TikTok as inappropriate. And she was saying, what are 13-year-olds sharing that actually has been removed by the manager of TikTok? What is happening? And I'm like, it's good that you talk to your daughter and you say, like, what do you think? What are these girls doing? And why do you think that's appropriate? So using it as a conversation starter. Okay, you have your privacy, but let's talk about, you tell me then, what sort of conversations? Is it appropriate? Is it inappropriate for all that we are talking? Are there sexual conversations? Is it about, and just keep the conversation going. Because you must keep the relationship also. That's important. I know it's like the tight rope in between. Yeah.
I just wanted to know what your view was in regards to masturbation, for children, like how.
Thank you for asking the question. Usually it's one more question and this masturbation question, so thanks for making it the second one. Masturbation is basically touching the genitals because it feels good. I tell parents for littlies, they are not masturbating, so don't freak. If your little one is touching the genitals, especially if it's a boy, look, it's hanging around there. He touches it, it feels good. I mean, you would too. I mean, if it was lovely, if you felt the same way to rub our nose, we'll all be sitting here rubbing our nose. But, it's little kids, the little ones don't masturbate. They're just touching it because it feels good, most of the time because they're plain bored. So, it's up. Then you have this conversation, and we talk about in birds and bees. We talk about it's a good thing God gives you for a special job of making babies. It is not a toy to be played with. And that is something that little ones can understand, not a toy. So you don't play with it. So every time you feel like you want to play with this God-given, your penis or your vagina or your vulva, play with something else. That's a real toy. Or call me and we'll read a story or we'll sing a song together. Sometimes they use it as a self-soothing, like I can't sleep, or it gets me to sleep. Then talk about how you can do something else. Let's read a story together or listen to some music. An alternate activity. Often parents say, the child is masturbating sitting in front of the television. Like, hello? They've got to have something to, you put their child in front of the idiot box, of course they masturbate, because they have nothing else to do with their hand. So if they're watching a program, give them something to hold then, instead of having their hands free. So find something alternate. When they move into the preteens and the teens, sex hormones are kicking in, and they're naturally, easily aroused. At that time, you talk to them, and all our books, Growing Up by the Book, in fact, even Birds and Bees, all talk about it. And we talk about, it's not the touching your genitals that matter, after all we touch it every time we bath. It is the fact that it goes with lustful thinking. And the Bible is clear that if you're thinking about someone lustfully, you might as well be having sex with them. So you talk, that's a good opening to talk about good feelings and good love and lustful love, which is like using somebody. You know, you love somebody, you think about a friend, and you think good thoughts, you know. Oh, I'm looking forward to time spent with Alice, or, you know, some good talk. Or lust is when you're thinking about somebody as using them for something sexual. So you can talk about that as an age-appropriate manner. The other thing you can talk to children is that because it is a good feeling and it sets up those dopamine and oxytocin, it can become habit-forming. And especially for like preteens, teens, every time they're frustrated or annoyed, they masturbate as a soothing mechanism. So you can talk about that, and all our books cover that. But it's a really important issue. Thank you. And, of course, the major thing to watch is if the masturbation is tied up with porn use. So a child who's masturbating is, you know, you always keep your eyes, like ears and eyes, that could it be tied in with porn use? Generally, people look a bit stunned at this point, yeah. You've got my email, so if you want to, something you don't want to. Okay.
Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure. Oh, thank you, darling.
I was coming. Yeah, awesome. I'm assuming you'll be hanging around for a few minutes.
Yeah, we'll hang.
Yeah, so if you have any other questions or you want to ask, you can go over. You know, if you wanted to ask, you know, all the ministers are here, so you can come and ask us anything if you want. And yeah, and so for the ones with teenagers, we'll be sending your kids with big questions and stuff back to you guys next term. So hopefully you're prepared and get the books so you can be even more prepared. But I'll pray and then we can head off. Yeah.